Okay, good evening. Welcome to another edition of Esoteric Book Club. We're reading The Fruitful Darkness by Joan Halifax. First three chapters were very good. Let's go over overall impressions and and then we could get into the nitty gritty. I really like her writing style. I feel like the preface was really cool just to get a background of where she's at and what experience she has. I think there was a quote from there that I really enjoyed. And then, yeah, just the reflections on, I think she's setting the tone for the book well, in that, the first three chapters, she focuses on being alone and being in silence, which, as we've read so many books in our past, that's just such a important piece of exploring yourself, is knowing how to sit with yourself and how to observe that. So I feel like she expresses it in a really poetic way, using her experience, her anthropological experience on the matter. And it does feel like she really knows it. Sometimes I did notice my mind drifting a bit. I think I'm not used to reading things maybe so poetic or in a creative style that it kind of loses me for a while, and I kind of forget what train of thought she's on. So I have to remind myself where she's at or like what she's talking about. But I mean, I think this is refreshing, though. I think it's definitely like a strong female author's perspective, which I'm really glad that we're embracing for our circle. And I love being alone, and I love silence. So I'm like, this is my kind of book. Cody, how did you enjoy these three chapters?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the first two chapters. The third one I liked, but I have some issues with, which we'll get into. But yeah, I really like her writing style. I like how she just kind of tells her personal story and lets you kind of absorb the message, but without like telling you what to think about it so much. It's like, here's the power of silence, and this is what it means, but like you have to incorporate it in your own life, your own way, and even I guess even the third chapter felt like it was like so much of just her like a story with the Huichol and like this indigenous knowledge, um, and it just didn't feel like it had like I'll get into it more later, but like it, I guess you're just like supposed to absorb it and take it however you will. But I had a hard time connecting with it, with like
Mhm.
finding anything really that meaningful. It felt like it was something that um, a lot of people have done a lot that kind of writing, and it just didn't do much for me. But the first two chapters had some really cool parts. I really liked that I think it resonated a lot with Frater Rocker's work, like a lot. There's some passages that were like, wow, this is really like really similar. So I think that's cool, coming from like a very different background than he does, and like kind of I think coming to a lot of the same conclusions. So seeing that was neat. Yeah, I like silence and exploring the darkness. I think that's really really cool. And I really like how she goes about it. These chapters.
Yeah, Britannia, how were your impressions of rereading the first three chapters?
I felt like, especially the second time around, it's really cool to have this feeling of growth. Like I feel like I've engaged with the darkness, and so it's nice to have like a different feeling. Like I could see where I was and where I'm at now. So I feel like the book worked like the first time, and that I'm getting a lot out of it the second time. I think like I agree with what Cody said with it. It aligns a lot with Frater Rocker's message, and that's kind of why I recommended it, because it talks about kind of like her fruitful darkness, and the fruit is like the actual like lens and that interaction that you have between like looking through the lens and engaging with the otherness. And I think that part was really poignant to like whenever I feel like there's momentum in an idea or like a spiritual way, like I find that the books kind of me, and they like, it's like picking a song. Like when you're listening to one song, then you go and like, you're like, oh, it made me think of this song, and then you follow yourself down the rabbit hole of like growth. And I really like that. And then I think she does that a lot with her writing style too, where yeah, it does get a little lofty and you get a little lost. But I think that's like part of her, like instead of telling you about what it's like to engage in the darkness, like as a, it's like a primary source instead of a secondary source. It's not like a commentary on, but it's like an expose of. So I really like that, and I do resonate with like her. The third chapter was more of like the engagement with shamanism, and I think that's why it was kind of like hard to connect with unless you really like shamanism, because that's like what those people in that like experience I think was about, and like her like release and engagement with the darkness and seeing that like darkness isn't all bad, that you can actually like get help in a lot of ways to grow stronger from the darkness. And I think that's where she was like first engaging with that as a practice instead of it just being like an idea.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I love her writing. I think she's amazing. I wish I could meet her or go to one of her talks one day, or go to one of her like she has retreats and stuff. So I really want to check it out at some point in my life.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay, yeah. So I don't think we need to, do we want to talk about the preface? I mean, it was kind of long. I don't know. Let's just get into the content, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a quote, I'll try to find it later, that I want to read from the, oh yeah. This book is also about the practice of ecology, an ecology of mind and spirit in relation to the earth, an ecology that sees initiation as a way of reconciling self and other, an ecology that confirms the yield of the darkness, the fruit of the suffering, and an ecology of compassion. I really liked that. And I think for when she wrote this, I mean, because it wasn't that long ago, but it also wasn't that recent. Yeah, 1993. I think that it's very, I think she might have set the stage for a lot of these type of like what we're seeing now in kind of the magical revival of animism in some, people that we're following at least. An ecological thing. Yeah, it's cool that she expressed it that way. And that's kind of like her life thing, it seems like, is an ecology of compassion. Like I really like that. Resonates strongly with Frater Acker. So yeah, the first chapter of The World Wound. Here she's getting into our collective suffering, right?
Yeah. I really love it because it's like your personal wound becomes the world wound. Too. Like it's one and the same. Like your small amount of pain is just like a tiny sliver of the collective slice that like the community experiences.
Yeah, and taking and diving into your own suffering in the right way, kind of ritually as she does it, or like going out into the wilderness and fasting and whatnot, is what like can help you see that. Like that's the fruit of compassion, right? So then you see, can find, instead of, because you can dive into your own suffering in such a way as like being totally self-indulgent, like feeling sorry for yourself and whatnot, and like just keep recapitulating it and just being really isolated. But when you like take it into nature and see it in yourself, and then expanding and seeing the wound of the world, and being able to have the perspective of like it's a reflection, and it's not just your own, but it's like it's the world is suffering too. The systems that we're in are perpetuating levels of suffering. So like, yeah, gaining perspective with suffering through diving deep in, but like also like coming out again. It's that like that whirlpool that goes in and comes out that we discussed, the vortex, or the
Yeah. I like the tone of it because it made it like, I don't want to say imminent, but like very valuable to do that alchemical work just by reading it. Like it was like, okay, yeah, this is really important for, spiritual people to really take the time to, yeah, not only like experience your own wounds, but understand how to transform it or how to like grow from it, or I use that as a baseline for your expansion. Like I really like, I don't know, it felt very like, yeah, powerful to do that. And like a kind of, I mean, that's what this work is about. So it's just nice to have that kind of like reminder of why this work's important and why we're important pieces to that, to the healing process. Because it's not just about your healing, it's about the collective wounds, journey.
What do you all think about her? Like, she's had such opportunity to do so much self-searching in these arenas. Like, well, how necessary is that? Sometimes I feel a little bit overwhelmed by her, like her own experience. I mean, I like the book because it is like just her own journey, and I think that's really cool. And it's like I think a lot of this book could just be read just for that, and it'd be a very enjoyable book, like just to take in her journey and her experience, not necessarily get it for yourself, like get a lot out of it, like try to mine it for wisdom necessarily, but just to take it for her like travel log in a sense, like both internal and external. But what do you think of like how sometimes I feel like, oh man, she's had so much, like I'll never like do all these things that she does, like to get this, like where do we take her information and really do mine it for that personal growth stuff when
Yeah,
she's had such a different experience than most of us will ever even is possible.
I agree. I thought kind of the same with just, and it, um, there is and it's hard because I don't want to call it privilege. Um, but it is a privilege to go through, and not like in a like you're privileged kind of way, but it's a privilege to be able to have the space and time that I mean, this is her whole life too. Like it seemed like she did this in the 70s. So like, and she's writing about it in the 90s. So, I mean, I think though it's like also
I think
about
that
creating that space for yourself. Like, I think if you do want to be a wandering Sandu, and have experiences like this, it's just about like really letting go and like not really trying to be anything. And then you become that nothing kind of. I mean, I know a lot of people who do this by just like taking odd jobs and traveling around and not staying anywhere. Or going and immersing themselves in a particular culture like she did anthropologically. I'm sure she did it for grants and like during the time or whatever schooling she was in. And then it kind of transformed into being invited back because she's a cool person type of deal. But I think there is a fine line between, going in on an ayahuasca retreat that costs $5,000, and going into the middle of the Amazon and having fleas attack you, for weeks on end while you're trying to be, in this thing. Like, so I just think it depends on a lifestyle thing. Like I'm land bound. So there is like, I want to be around my family. I want to be around my friends. I want to affect my community in a way that's like individual and personal. I don't want my life to necessarily be like that. And I've tried it kind of, like moving and uprooting everything, and it just didn't work for me. So unless I go through, I always said, unless I go through some gnarly trauma that's like, I don't think I can get out of by myself, then I will remove myself from society and go join something, to like, you know, absolve the karma of the world and not make my life about me anymore. But I think you have to really like, I want to have, a family, a future, like community to be involved in. And with that becomes participating in society in that way.
she created a sangha after she traveled around. So she created like it's up in
In
Ojai. We should
Ojai.
actually go we should go with Dylan because it's a really beautiful place to walk around. But
Yeah.
she created that like because she wanted community. 'Cause it was like that whole like, that there's this whole thing where like bodhisattvas, they go out on their own and have that solitude and everything. That's where their growth and knowledge and wisdom comes from. But then it means a lot to them, but it doesn't mean a lot to like the collective wound unless they do something community oriented. So like in Buddhism, the Sangha is like one of the three folds of the path. And it's like hugely important. So I think that's why it's so cool that she actually activated that part of the journey for herself and for other people. Because not even just through her writing, but like actually making a physical place that you can go and immerse yourself in these things without having to go all the way to like the Annapuras or something. Because I mean, I literally like we have the same like locale as she does. We could go to pretty much anything, like the Mexico like shamans and to like her Ojai thing. We could go to those places and like I mean, I was supposed to go to the Annapuras where she hiked. I was supposed to do that exact same hike, the same pilgrimage at the same time of year as that she went, where people do that walk. That was like why I was going. And it was like metaphorical because my grandpa died and I was gonna like do this whole thing. So it's like, I mean, they are accessible, but they're also accessible in the sense of like Ojai is really close too. Like we could go there and engage like with the actual community too. But I think we're like holding down our own type of community by having circle, which I find invaluable. So I thank you guys for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes Sangha can be really self-isolated too, which is can be a bummer in a lot of communities. So I won't speak for hers, but I can see that. So that can be tough. People have made Sangha that don't do anything. You see like Baptists out like going to disasters and helping disaster relief, but you don't see Buddhists doing that very much, which is kind of sad. But maybe they do, but the Baptists are really well organized with that.
There's a lot more money in Christianity than there is in Buddhism.
Yeah.
I mean, not at an individual level, maybe, but and like, yeah, collective like tithing.
Yeah, they've done a really good job with that. And I mean, and Buddhism in the United States is a very different thing than it is in Asia. So, and I've never been to Asia, but I just, yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah. In different parts of Asia, it's very different too, of course.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah, I know I have access to like remote mountains, and I could do like fasting retreats in the mountains without a tent and stuff if I
I feel
wanted.
like you do that already, kind of.
Not quite that, but yeah, I could. Yeah, I'm thinking of actually doing that this summer too. But doing the final, I might do that and do the final ritual of the Holy Heretics book
Yeah,
in the mountains.
nice. You should.
Yeah. I'll probably do that.
Cody, that sounds epic. The lineup, yes.
Yeah.
I do think that there is like a positioning in society that like was granted to her from the get-go. So,
oh yeah, she has a very specific trajectory that's very hard, but not common, like with the anthropology and all that. Then it's cool. Like I think it's really cool, and we'll get to the third chapter, but that's where it's like gets more interesting than that, I think.
well, yeah, I mean, do we want to move to the second chapter?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know what
Anything else in the first
Yeah, I'm
chapter?
down. They all kind of blend together. Like the first chapter
Yeah.
is like the intro to how she like views the world and the way she's like set up her spiritual path. And I think the second chapter, short but sweet, was like really impactful.
Let me do a quote from the first chapter before we move on. I'll read this whole paragraph because talking about the threshold, and I like this. This is where it really resonated with Frater Rockers, like opening the door to the others, to the otherness, like that place of uncertainty, that place of darkness, like so you have like severance, threshold, and then return is like the path of the of initiation. But so the threshold is where like the real meat of the action happens. So in the threshold, we experience ourselves as multiplex. I think this is page 17, but I have a
it is.
Okay. So it actually my Kindle actually matches up So I have the Kindle version,
Yeah,
which I don't like that much, but I just did it because it's cheaper and easier anyway.
totally.
But okay, in the threshold, we experience ourselves as a multiplex. We are both mortal and God, human and creature, wild and cultured, male and female, old and dying, and fresh and newborn. We are rough and unmade, not held together. The threshold is where grain and chaff, beater and beaten, are mixed. More explicitly, the threshold is where we encounter death and can be renewed and restored through the unleashed primordial powers stored in the structures of the mind. These energies living in the imagination take the shapes of gods and demons, or phobias, compulsions, and madness, and become visible by our dwelling in the threshold space between worlds. Some people think that human beings are the ground where the gods dwell, but I am sure that it is not in us, but the interworld between us and sacred space that the gods finally arise. See,
Geez,
that's like
beautiful.
that's such like the ingenium, like that's like
I love that quote.
being able to reside in the threshold to contact spirits, like that's where, and like to be clear there and to be able to contact those things in a pure, like in a pure state, to have like that spirit contact. And it's and it's dangerous, it's that dangerous dark place.
Yeah, geez. I mean, that's a really beautiful, because I'm really glad she, explained it that way, and thanks for reading it again. Because I mean, it makes it more like a visceral experience, And it ties together the Bardo space with recontacting otherness and how to pick your team wisely, or understand what gods you serve, or how you incorporate that, into your experience for manifestation. It's very interesting.
Or what demons are causing your suffering, and being able to like encounter them and interact with them in such a way to turn them into something not so suffering.
Mm-hmm. Which I hope she gets into alchemizing the space a little bit more.
Yeah.
It seems like
I
she's
think
that.
she kind of does it in an elemental way when she like deconstructs herself while she deconstructs the like landscapes and the environments. Like she connects with like the deconstructed version and then kind of reapplies that to the world wound as a collective landscape when she's like addressing like any metaphysical or like I don't know, metaphorical growth that she goes through while she's on those, and the way she wonders about other people's paths and what they're doing and how they're faring out there. It's like very like light in the darkness, like reminds me of like when you're backpacking and you see like a headlamp on the hill, like far off in the distance, and you're just like somebody out here is like, facing their demons and like hiking their heart out and like relaxing and like letting go of things and reconnecting and like just nice to know there's another headlamp out there like miles away that you can just see in the darkness. Like I don't know, it's kind of like that with the way she like connects to the other people versus herself in the landscape. Very like ecologically minded, but in like a more like spiritual way. I don't know. I really like that elemental version of that she has in the landscapes and what she sees and experiences, and like I just that imagery of her wrapped in a tarp out in Joshua Tree resonates so much because I literally went out there by myself during a storm and slept in my sleeping bag on one of the benches, like just laying there, letting the rain like hit my face as I like fell asleep. And I just like put a tarp over my sleeping bag and just like fell asleep, like watching the like rain and like lightning and stuff. And it was like I needed that trip really bad, and just like connecting with the barren landscape and then seeing it come alive in like a airway and like a fire way with the lightning, and then like the water from the rain, and then just like the earth, the way it like evokes smell and like colors and like the animals and stuff that come out of it. It was just like a really reconnecting experience in like a very like hedonistic way or like an animalistic way.
I love when she talked about the winds. I don't know if that was the first chapter or the second chapter. I'll have to find it, but it's just, it really, because it was the four winds. It was the four angel, maybe it was the third chapter, the four angel winds, which was like, Oh, you know what? And I think it was a quote actually from one of the people. Gosh, my reading comprehension is not, it's like I lead book club and I don't have much reading comprehension, but it's just cool because that's like the four kings, you know, or the four directions of the winds, you know, and that's something I've been exploring more lately, just in my experience. Like I've been feeling them a little bit more, which is nice. Different perspective on elemental workings. I'll find it. But that reminded me of what you said, because being in the elements is an important aspect of this work.
Yeah, I mean, getting away from, again, it's like the severance from like conventional human reality, and then connecting to the uncertainty and the darkness of nature, you know, of like the unpredictable and powerful elemental forces, and relating to them individually from your own, without the so much influence from society, and then being transformed, and then that allowing yourself to be transformed by them, right?
It's interesting because the way she puts it, it feels like a lot of people have done this work. What do you all think of, because about that? Because it's hard to think that a lot of people have done this work when society is the way that it is.
That's a really good question. And yeah, I think that's well
Wait, can you
articulated.
repeat that question again?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like from the tone of the book that this is an accessible like way to experience darkness, and that has been done in many cultures. And I mean, even the type of like comparisons that we're seeing to all of the works that we read, you know, this is like part of like an integral part of the process of spirituality. So I feel like a lot of people do this, and it's like, why is our society the way that it is right now? Is like my overall question. If we have powerful people like this that have done the work, you know?
I think that there's the real work and then there's the fake work, the fake version of it, like people going to the gym. Like, yeah, that creates the endorphins, like the chemical reaction you want. So there is some alchemizing, but it's not fully processed unless you're doing it intentionally and aware. Like, and I think the way that she approaches it is from that heart space, that compassion, which I think is like the root of where that lens for us to like connect inwardly and outwardly is in the heart. Like it really is like love that creates that darkness, and then like that love for yourself, that inner like relationship, and then that external relationship and that love that you see in the world. And when you resonate with all the different things or have compassion for those things, you create those connections, and then that creates that web of awareness. So I think that people cut themselves off from that web and they do the self work, but like the self is nothing without the sangha. Like you say, like if you're operating as like an isolated thing versus like a connected being, like that's a huge difference in like the outcome. Like I think that's the only difference, that you know what I mean? Like this world is, especially with COVID, I've just noticed the way people drive and talk to each other and interact is just so different than it used to be. And I was hoping that things were getting better, and they felt like they were, with like a lot of the community building and a lot of like people from our generations like putting a lot of work into making it that way, and having a lot of it become like capitalistic and individualistic again in a very short period of time was like kind of a low blow to like that spiritual growth that I think we're going through. But I think that's part of that fruitful darkness, where people really need to reject capitalism and really reject those ideas that work against what we're all working for collectively. And I think that realization of like, oh, stop buying off Amazon, and those kind of things are catching on. They're not like so like hippy dippy like extreme to be like, oh, I only buy from like farmers markets and stuff. Like most people of like any bipartisan direction would agree that those foods are better.
Well, I mean,
So at least like there's that.
I think that there's also victim blaming with a lot of that type of rhetoric. Like it's really inaccessible to like say only buy things from farmers markets. Like especially when community efforts of farmers markets are being shut down on a continuous basis. Like our system is like rigged so that you do buy it. But I mean, that aside, like what I think what you're saying, Britannia, is that not a lot of people have done this work. Is that what
I don't think they've fully actualize the work. No. Yeah. I think that they engage with it on a superficial level and to an extent where it puts a band-aid or makes them feel good, but they don't go past it into the place where it makes them feel uncomfortable and weird. And most people are still averting their darkness. And instead of engaging with it and connecting with it and having compassion for themselves, they just do the othering thing, like you said, and kind of, make it more like segregated. Like, this is me, that's you. Like, what was it, the
I feel like,
Prada chart where it's
Uh,
like I, here, now versus like we, them,
yeah,
their,
for sure.
like, like that whole thing. I'm just like, there's a perspective shift with that. And I think that people need to move past that first barrier and get to the uncomfortable stuff.
I think there's that, and that the return part, the severance threshold return, the third return part is really difficult. I think actually in a lot of ways, like the severance and threshold is easier, and
Okay.
you can do that, but then returning is
Mhm.
like you return and like the world floods in and you're just like caught up in the storm of society again. Like it's so hard. Like the magic, the power of capitalism, of like the capitalist machine is just so strong
Hmm.
because of the economics of our economic system, because that's how we live. I mean, it's like ultimately like the world, and it's an age old problem. This isn't like new at all. The world comes crashing in. We can like raise ourselves to heaven, but the world is always there. And
Hmm.
like to like to bridge heaven and earth is like really, really difficult. And I
Hmm.
mean, Saint Augustine like dealt with this, right? Like was like the huge theme in his writings. And so it's like yeah, I mean, that's the difficulty of doing spiritual work, is like actually making it meaningful in the world. And there are like you can make, and like I say, like the Baptists do go out and do like good service works, and they like do. I think that there's a lot of people who actually are in mainstream religion who actually do like come back and return and do like good spiritual work and actually make it work. Of course, we give a bad name to mainstream religion, but I think a lot of times they do good work
Hmm.
because they are returned. They are like in community that where they can do it, and they get money through tithing where they can do it. But so yeah, I think a lot of people do actually do the severance and threshold work, but don't take it back. I mean, I think I personally have done that a lot, and like return is really, really difficult. It like because you can transform a lot, but then it's like the world just molds you right back into it. It's
Hmm.
like what I was like complaining about before we started this, is like my all my issues are economic. It's like I'm like struggling with work because like all the work options suck in this world. Like they suck. It's like making ends meet is like what, and but then like but that becomes so much of my focus, is like trying to figure out what I need to do to make money, that like that molds me into like totally like ignoring my spiritual progress and like spiritual stuff. Um
I
so
mean,
it's
that's the case with so many people I know. It's like I'm so
yeah,
inundated or, overwhelmed and distracted from having to just survive, And
yeah.
I think breaking that, yeah, like just even escaping the survival mode that was either instilled with us in childhood or just instilled with us through society is like, I mean, a huge detriment to our spiritual evolution.
My I was just visiting my friend Jamie. I should name names on the video.
I know.
My friend in
Names,
Texas,
people.
he's luckily he has a nice little piece of land in the country outside of Austin. And
Cool.
but he's like wants to like he's gonna have like his friends stay there. He was just like, I love him because he's like, some people just can't work. They're just like not made to work in the society, and we should support that. Like let them be like not have to work. Like, and I just love that. He's very convicted in that in that. And I really, and it's like such, like, most people hearing that would be like, in this society would be horrified, like, oh, you're not contributing to the economy, you don't work, like
Well, I mean, the whole thing, I think what I was instilled with is like, at least I know a few people who, yeah, have said things like that to me. And they're always in situations that they don't necessarily want to be in either. So, like, there's a sacrifice when you don't want to work, but you still want to live in Orange County or LA. You're usually dating somebody who's taking care of you, and then you're sacrificing in some way. So, I mean, my mom was, I mean, that's how I was raised with like, don't have to rely on anybody because you need to be able to like manage your baseline, or else you're going to have to sacrifice something, in order to like not have to do what you don't want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think
with,
yeah, that's more, I mean, maybe a woman's issue of survival. I don't know. I mean, that's just how some women have used it in that way. I think for maybe like a non-gendered kind of approach to that would be just like you're sacrificing somewhere. Like there is like, if you choose not to participate in society, then society will continue that way. Like, I don't know, right?
I mean, I think there's two sides of the coin where like it depends how you want to engage things. Because I think it's like at what level are you dedicating your life? Like, are you at the threshold? Are you at the like, like the hermit mode where like certain people need to change things from the outside because that's like their personal journey and what they need. And like that's the way that they're going to be able to grow and like make the world a better place. But like some people do better like working inside the system and like growing off of what's already built that they can like change. And I think it depends on like if you've come back from the return and you can like this is what I was going to say about the return too is like when you've expanded your mind, your heart, your spirituality, your awareness, all that, and then you try to cram it back into the old box that you came out of when you're returning, you realize that box doesn't fit and that you need to grow
Mm.
outside the box. And I think that's where the scary unknown, what do I do next? I feel like I'm not doing enough, but I don't know what direction to go in. So it's hard to even like go fast in a direction. Like that's I think where we're all at. And like there's this return to society where we realize like, oh yo, this thing isn't the way we want it and we want to change it. But like how can we engage with it and change it? Because I think a lot of people have done that like alternative path, which I think is awesome too, build outside the system, like whether it's Bitcoin or like ecosystems, like eco communities and stuff. Like there's a lot of cool things going on out there. And I think both need to be happening
Yeah.
to foster change because it's kind of like things are growing out here and then like things are growing out here and then they'll come together at some point. But right now there's like this gray zone that we're all living in.
I
And
agree.
yeah, and I think it's kind of lays like a blank slate for us to like do a lot of like work. It's kind of like the angel work, like it's giving us space to create
Well,
and be like imaginative and stuff like that. And this where like
yeah.
that imperfection, imagination, and like indifference and all that kind of stuff. Like you kind of have to like just pick what lane you want to drive in and go like be like, hey, like I want to work on spirituality this way. I want to work on society this way. I want to engage with the world this way. So you're just gonna go towards things that you can ping off of that you kind of align with because I don't know, everything else is kind of a big waste of time. Like if you're gonna like fight the system, but you're going against it in a way that's not you're like a tiny little boat in this giant sea of storm. Like that's not going to be effective.
Totally agree. Yeah. I mean, I think what I learned right now is just to meet that with non-judgment. Like I came at that issue with based on, a societal expectation of you have to work in order to survive. So like acknowledging that and then like having non-judgment for that because like, yeah, I do think that there's that every approach is needed to tackle something like this, like a unjust society or whatever we want to call it. You know, and there are movements that have, like Michael Tillinger's Ubuntu movement is a really good example of something that is able to, he set up a contributionalist model in South Africa, and there's a few other kind of small towns that are being created that are independent of government systems, but also participating in government systems by underbidding them for the cost of their products. So I mean, ultimately, in like a big enough kind of framework that would like potentially abolish, or take over as a new economic model because the division of labor would be more just and more equitable, then
Are they privatized companies then?
no, he does it in a contributionalist model. So I guess it's like you,
503. Because that's
yeah,
actually, because I agree with that model, because I was going to say it's like a lot of the time, what these companies do is they will do like I call it the mean well conflict, where they start off like small and good, and then when they got government contracts, then it's about like how low you can bid, but then like how like you can provide the least for the least amount of money. And I've been noticing that across the financial, insurance, social security, like all these privatized entities that get involved with these companies like tend to end up that way. So I'm like just worried that like the system is inherently flawed to reward that.
he's not, so he's operating in Bitcoin, and then they have free energy. So there's no like I don't know, I mean
No
that's
overhead,
like
basically.
secret, but there's no overhead in what they're producing. And also they're not doing money. Like there's no money in
Dude,
there.
that's amazing. Okay, yeah, that's what I was gonna say because I actually am a huge I love the idea of crypto or like just blockchain. I feel like blockchain is the more uh important and
Blockchain's a
financially and
technology.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. The blockchain is way more important than the actual currency just because of the way blockchain works. Like that itself is like worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, I mean, there's
But
so many
the
applications of blockchain that's not just currency, which is
well, but
great.
I think that there could be a way of like bartering through blockchain that would be cutting even the need for like coin at all because what is happening is like people with mining power are the ones getting the coins and then they're holding them and then they're letting them once they get high and then they buy them low again and then they just been repeating the cycles and that's why some of these coins have been backed by each other have been crashing is because they've been doing that. It's called like washing the money basically, like they keep washing it through the cycle. um so if we can get around like some of that kind of stuff, I think that like the currency itself can be a way of like engaging with that otherness that we're trying to connect to. Like we're doing it with AI and a lot of that stuff, like reaching for the fringes of like what's possible right now. And I think that we're at the like infancy stages of a lot of that technology, whether it's because I'm doing a workshop right now for funsies with work and it's AI, but it's like AI robo advisors. So it's like they're going to be like integrating AI into like finance.
That sounds, I don't know. I don't really want to. Let's get back on. I love that that's you're in this space, and that's like so cool. But
Well, no,
maybe
I'm trying to tie it back into like the way we're like changing like the what we think is like possible with the world and like the way we're kind of like engaging with that darkness. Like all these things are black mirrors.
I mean, I think until we as a collective like get our act together, all of these systems can be like or can be thwarted. I mean, that's why I'm so excited that Michael Tillinger's not doing it in the United States, and he tried and
Yeah.
no way. Even Canada was like, this doesn't work, and it totally failed. Like it needs to be so removed from it right now to keep it pure and to have the people that are in it like be like down, and like not fight it at every step, which is like yeah, I don't think that like I think any system that we implement right now because we have so many wounds individually and collective that contribute to the collective just like have that. So I guess that answers my question of like not enough people have returned from their thresholds that they've crossed.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying with the black mirror of those things, like the way that we're using them, the inherent flaws of the system, my complaints about crypto or AI or whatever everyone's afraid of from those systems. I think like what you're saying, it's like a black mirror holding up like where people haven't changed enough for the like the systems are there for the change to be in place, but like the people aren't there. They're not ready to meet like their threshold or the return back to something. You know what I mean? Like there's I don't know. There's like a lack of follow through from a lot of people, I think.
What do you think, Cody?
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I think these systems of like AI and blockchain and stuff could actually free us to like and actually engage with what's real. You
Mm.
know, they're like the ultimately most unreal things we have, but they can like take over all the all the abstract shit that we like do that's totally like not real, like the world of finance, the world, and just like do that for us so that we can engage with nature.
yeah, like the robots replacing people, but like for us to have more free time to like do our thing as humans
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope for that. I hope for that. And I think that is the way that AI is being used from a lot of the people that I see professionally using it. It seems to be like a way of like having the robot do the work for you. And it also trains it to be more human. The more people use it for human things, like for human tasks that would like be seen as human and changing that into like that's now the AI's task. And now I get to be a human again and rediscover what it is to be human and reconnect with that, like what that means, you know? I don't know.
Yeah. And to bring it back to the book and like maybe get into the second chapter, but like I think we're like and I think to like kind of bring it back to what we were talking about before, but like how do we get out of the threshold and actually make it real? I think silence is really important. And I think a lot of people like it's really hard to kind of stay silent or stay in silence. It's like the power of the Sphinx is to shut up, right? The one of the powers is to be silent. And I think that's really important.
Wait, what are you
To
referring to there?
powers of the Sphinx,
Mhm.
the classic Hermetic doctrines. They're
Okay.
like powers of four elements: the
Okay.
eagle, the bull, the angel, and the lion.
Oh yeah, the lion
Yeah,
is Taurus, right? Or no, Taurus is the bull.
Taurus is the bull.
Which cardinal? Which cardinal
Lion.
directs Leo? Is silence
No, silence is the bull,
the bull,
actually.
right?
Yeah, in that. And the earth element, I
Hmm.
believe. So they're elemental that correspondences too, but
Yeah, with
yeah.
the cardinal directions.
But
Okay.
anyway, like the power of silence, because like when we try to make something of it, that's when like it becomes, I don't know, it becomes a doctrine and it becomes something that like that's like it's become something when it's like when like the threshold isn't anything. It's like that uncertain space where it's not defined. But when we then like make noise and to try to define it, it becomes something that like then of course can be countered by something else, and then it creates tumultuousness,
Yeah, I have issues
suffering.
with this in my personal life, like keeping my mouth shut seems
Yeah.
to be like a theme of that I need to practice lately, you know? Um, but in good ways, like things are, I'm not really shooting myself in the foot too bad, but what do we like? And this has always been something that like I understand. I love sitting in silence. I love meditating and I love being in that in between space where finding that break of thought and idea and whatnot. And being open in that space. But I mean, what else is it about being silent about the things that you see in that space? Because I interpret and it comes out pretty clear whenever I interpret it. And it's important. I always feel like it's important to talk about these things. And I always feel like kind of like whenever I read things like this, I feel like, and maybe this is just, I'm not trying to be a victim here, but I feel like I'm being like shamed for like talking about my like psychic experiences. You know what I mean? I don't know.
No, no. I think like in her other books, like you'll realize that's like she literally has a whole book on shamanism dedicated to like like those experiences being like anthropologically collected and shared, which I think is amazing. And I feel like I think what you're doing is your relationship with otherness, like that that way of transmuting in a very like clear and concise way means like your lens is clear, and I feel like that's why we meditate and stuff. Um, I think there is that abstraction of message that we create into a concrete translation, which there's something about being able to translate something abstract outside of you into something tangible within you and then externally outside of yourself. There's this that's the alchemic process of like spiritual divine like light like coming through you into you and then out of you in another way, like into the lower realm, like of the rootedness, whereas like it's just a little bit above you when you're like experiencing it. You know, it's a little bit outside you, a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more abstract. And then like for you to be able to translate it so beautifully is like, that's like the whole goal.
Thank you. And that's how I feel. I feel like it's important for the return to be able to talk about what you experienced in the threshold sometimes. I mean, depending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Check
yeah,
out this quote on 29. Over here, go Cody. Sorry.
but I was just gonna say that like maybe it is like, well, it's kind of like in the I'm thinking of meditations on the tarot where it's like the Yod He Vav He. It's like you do the Yod He Vav is like the experience of connecting with the divine, and then like kind of having some interpretation of it, and then like making some magic happen, and then writing about it, right? And then like expressing it into the world about your experience. And like, so there is kind of, I guess that describes that initiatory process too. But so I think there is, I think you have to be like, you have to be silent to an extent until you can like really like speak the truth in a way that like is truth, you know. And then other people like to actually get it will have to be silent and listen too, you know. So there's like, so we have to be silent in order to listen to the truth. We have to like retreat and be
Yeah.
silent. But then being careful about like when we actually speak is really, I think that's really the lesson in silence. It's like, and our society is full of people like making a lot of noise about a lot of spiritual shit that's like a whole lot of bullshit, because it's like super tainted by the ego and super tainted by like making money off of stuff. Like, yeah,
Agreed.
yeah.
Well,
Oh,
she says
like
that too.
ego,
It's like, is
ego spirituality. Ugh. Sorry.
no, I mean, that's perfectly with what she said. It was like, on 28 to 29, I'll like paraphrase the two things, but it's like the true wisdom is only to be found far away from people out in the great solitude, and it is not found in play but through suffering. Solitude and suffering open the human mind, and therefore a shaman seeks his wisdom there. And that's a Don Jose quote. And then on 29, like on the returning from the wilds, we can learn the craft of ceremony from a teacher and make attempts to conceptualize the knowledge of non-duality learned in the wilderness. But the true muscle of learning strength when we are alone. We are to face our trials truly alone and to find comfort and courage in the solitude. And then the aloneness teaches us how we are really connected to the interdepending and with everything. The paradox with this, it may seem, solitude reveals our interrelatedness.
Yeah.
It's like nail on the head.
Yeah. I'm glad you read that, because the quote above it talked about
John's quote. Yeah.
John's quote of, the angel of air. Put off your shoes and your clothing and suffer the angel of air to embrace all your body. Then breathe long and deeply, that the angel of air shall cast out of your body all uncleanliness, which defiles it without and within. I feel like that's a call to the four kings, right? Of the winds.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Like if not like a ritual within itself, not only reading it, but like if you like actually do that, like if you ever go out into nature and kind of just like ever go to like a hot spring, you like strip down, you're just standing there, like you're like, kind of, I don't know, you're steaming from the hot water, but you're like standing in this like cold air, and it just, you feel so alive. Like in like a very like connected way. Like you don't feel like there's anything between you and the thing.
When I felt that's I mean a really visceral experience of it, which is cool. I felt the winds calling during Trevor Moonshine.
Yeah, I felt that too. It was like blowing
wind,
through,
right?
but it was like blowing through your clothes, like through your soul. You like felt this like cold
Yeah,
drawing. It was like almost like a river of air.
I know, right? Okay, I'm
It
glad
was
you
very
felt that
visceral for
too.
me. I had like the synesthesia. I was like, whoa.
Yeah,
I
and it
can't
was
tell if
his
I'm cold or
music with
hot.
it.
Like,
Oh my God. I was like, and just the whole setting was like he really transmit, like yeah, angels speak through him for sure. But I mean, you know, and through all of
Who's
us.
that?
This DJ Trevor Moontribe. Um, there's the 30 years of we just went to the 30-year anniversary of Moontribe, which has been like a desert party. It's been
Yeah,
going on for 30 years. So they had
yeah.
an anniversary party that was just, I mean, unreal. Like everybody really brought their A game, and it was just like I had a whole heart transformational moment that was like heart opening thing. It was nuts, but in a great way. But yeah, his set was really good, like unreal. I mean, he like lives in Costa Rica right now, and it's just like a DJ, you know, like so his music is like his way of, you know, translating the divine for sure. Everybody has.
So yeah, that's awesome. I feel like I can relate to that like wind experience. It felt relatable anyway, just from what you said.
Right.
But this quote that you just quoted, it's such a lovely quote. But that's not in the King James version of the Bible. What is the Essene Gospel of John?
I
I
know
should
that's
know
what I
this,
was
but
also.
because that's not what your grandma's Bible right there.
And that's what I was gonna.
Not
I
your
was just
grandma's
gonna ask
Bible.
you. I was just gonna ask you, Cody, because you know more about this type of stuff. I'm like, is this from the Gospel of John in Essene Gospel of John? Like, I don't know what
So
that is.
it's a different version of a gospel, I think, like from somewhere else that's
There's so
not
many
your
edited
normal.
versions, but King James,
Yeah.
like, that was like the whole crusade. He like basically burned all the other versions of the Bible, or like not him, but like, you know, like throughout time, like they burned like the old versions and like only like transcribed their version. So like at best, it's like not even close to what you already know. Like as a scholar,
Yeah.
if you were studying this as like a literature piece or like an anthropological like thing, it's not what it was. So
Yeah,
there's a
my
lot of
understanding is
translations that
like
I like better. Other languages have way better translations, like more Latin based, or like Greek based languages have way better translations. And then you translate them from that language.
yeah.
So like you get like a German translation or like a French translation or like a Norwegian translation and then translate it from like Swedish to English. It's like a lot better.
Yeah, and my understanding is like there's whole other gospels that they have in like Eritrea and Ethiopia and different parts of Africa, northern Africa, that like yeah, that have much different stuff. That's such an interesting thing about the Bible.
Because is this John?
Makes you like totally call bullshit on all those like evangelicals in the US who just like say that their Bible is the only real one because it just can't be.
Everyone
Yeah.
trusts their reliable source to
Yeah.
translate, and I get that because it's like their culture, their heritage. They're trusting their family and their ancestors to translate and carry this flame of knowledge, and they hope that it's like the purest form of that knowledge. And so I get that connection to that like spiritual nationalism, as I would put it. But I think that's very limiting for people because you're not connecting if you know, like in a lot of religions, you can't even like name God or like that spirituality that like reverberates through everything because that would disrespect it. A lot of native cultures, you can't, they don't even name it because it's disrespect to even try and encapsulate it with a name. And I think that that same philosophy is how I feel about a lot of organized religions in general, is that they're right until they're not. Like I think their wrongness is not like the whole return. Like they're not returning back to like the wholeness of like what that message means. It stayed secular and specialized. And I think our society like does reward like specialized things. So if you have like a specialized religion that's like claiming to have like the right way and stuff, like especially if your ancestors have been the ones to translate that, like you're not gonna just throw that to the wind. But at the same time, like I kind of am glad that I grew up with like an allowance to I don't know, read other things and believe other things. And though my family is extremely Catholic and I'm the only grandchild not baptized out of 30. So like they literally look at me like my soul's going to hell. Like they really do believe that I'm like I'm like right in what I'm doing in my path. And like that's like a huge thing for those people to do. And so I feel like, you know, it's possible for people to like get there as long as they have like the experience one on one with themselves or those other things. I think that makes it a lot more accessible for them. That's like what's going to change things. Like us going back into ourselves, us returning and then going outward like with it. I
Yeah.
don't know. There's a really cool quote from the Sung Dynasty painter slash poet on 54, which was the inexhaustible is their mystery. In order to grasp their creations, one must love them utterly, study their essential spirit diligently, and never cease contemplating them and wandering among them. I just like that. She's using it as like a spiritual ecology metaphor, where I feel like it's like walking with the otherness and
Chapter
stuff.
4? Yeah,
Yeah, that's
54
interesting.
chapter 4.
That's the next
Oh, crap.
chapter. We haven't
I
read
read
that
ahead. Dang
far
it. I'm
yet.
sorry, crap. I'm sorry. I read forward a little bit, but I was just trying to tie it back into like that the ecology of what we're like talking about, like the spirituality and like the climate of things.
For sure.
What came to mind for me is that, and this ties into, I guess, chapter 3, is like tradition. Like we're like it's tradition. I think what you said was like you're like compassion for evangelicals in that like they have a tradition that binds them to like a path and to some kind of harmony in that. And then but so like I don't know. I feel like I can equivocate then that to like she's romanticizing then in the 3rd chapter like Huichol tradition as like a better tradition, but that like comes to harmony. But so but like but we're kind of like in this place of like eschewing tradition to some degree, to like find eschewing our own tradition to find like a better tradition or something. But like in doing that, or in eschewing some kind of like what we think is like wrong, are we like actually alienating ourselves from like some sense of like a way, a path that's like laid down by our ancestors, by like trying to find something better out there, by like romanticizing indigenous cultures in some way, like
I mean, I
instead
agree.
of like embracing what we have in a sense? Like
I agree. I mean, I don't know. I didn't necessarily read that her tone was, though, that she thought that that was like that she was romanticizing it. I don't know. Maybe I missed it in that way. I mean, I more read it as fact, kind of. But and I agree with you to a big degree. Of like sometimes for the most amount of people embracing what traditions have been set, but maybe going further into that and kind of knowing where the corruption lies within some of those systems is
yeah,
really what should be focused on for like mass societal change. I mean, I do think that the society that she's talking about was probably a lot more thriving at some other point in history. And so since it's such a small group, it probably doesn't need to be as, I don't know, because we haven't experienced it, but like as universally indoctrinated as it is in current time. I don't know, in their society. I also don't think that all of the peyote traditions are the same or are not adulterated. I mean, especially in the United States, I've been a part of ceremonies. I mean, I haven't done peyote, but I've been of 2 degrees of people who do those ceremonies often. 1 degree, I guess. Individual. How do you say? I know people who run those ceremonies like that, and I would say that they're not all safe spaces or like have the overall healing of society in mind, nor have those people been, nor have all of the people that are a part of the ceremony been a part of the cultural tradition since childhood, which I think is how she's describing it in this book, is that the people who participate have been a part of this, like this is a way of life because this is our culture, like this is what we do, there's no other way type of deal. When you start transplanting that elsewhere to people that don't share those ideologies, I think there's a lot more room for corruption of those systems, especially when you have substances like peyote in the mix. There's a lot of like confusion that can be wring from that. I'm kind of on a rant now, but I hope I'm kind of getting to the point that
No, like I could kind of circle it back in too, because like I agree and disagree in certain ways, because I think she acknowledges that there's a war between shamans going on down like at the end of the chapter, like that experience being down there. She like acknowledges that there's like a war between like the shamans, not only between the shamans and each other, but like the shamans and like
oh, I missed
their
that.
own like powers.
And the
Maybe
end
that's
of
in
this
chapter
chapter,
4.
that might be chapter 4.
Yeah, that might be chapter 4.
Hold on. Here's the end of this chapter.
Chapter 3, which is the way of traditions.
Maybe. Oh, maybe. Okay. Well, yeah. She goes into that
She ends it
about
by
like
ending what the fire ceremony like was.
yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, she goes into that where she acknowledges the war between that and where it's like not all safe and stuff. But I think what she's trying to do is like reignite the returning in two different ways. Like she's trying to get people to return because you see what you can fix and what you can work with and what you have similar to like the past things. But I think it's like also like reconnecting with the spirits in the sense of like people have become disconnected in general, and that like she's just kind of edging people towards the idea of like reconnecting with spirituality on like a real level where it's not, oh, I just feel so good after I meditate and do yoga. It's like, no, I just like cried because I remembered like some fucked up shit and I worked through it. You know what I mean? Like, I think she's trying to get people to like go back to things outside themselves that are abstract and to like consider like checking in with the otherness. And I think that's where she's like trying to go with like this whole ceremony thing. Because what's it, like page 40, she's like, the ceremony is the way to keep things in order and to honor the powers that bring about harmony. And that's kind of how I feel about magic, like the like ceremonial part of magic. So I feel
Yeah.
like there's this like she's kind of basically saying like return to the engagement with like the otherness instead of just the self, because like the self is the gateway to the otherness in a lot of ways. You have to know yourself to be able to know how to look through yourself and engage with like the otherness, whereas like I think a lot of people get stuck in the self train and then that's where it kind of ends.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that she framed the whole chapter with like her whole story with the wee chol, but with not a lot of like that quote you just gave was like a kind of a direct like lesson that but she didn't really like explain a lot about the lesson from it, which I kind of appreciate. Again, like I said in the opening, kind of appreciate that we can kind of make of it what we will, but
Mm-hmm.
the that it was framed with like the return to tradition or like the point the like um the power of tradition or
Way
whatever
of
is
tradition.
like and like how important it is to return to our or like ancestral like an ancestral
I mean,
path
I
or
don't agree
something
with
like
that all
that.
the way.
Yeah.
Like for
Yeah, I mean maybe
if
I
we
take it
were
less literal and more like spiritual, like return to like the way of like sensing in a simpler way, like and returning back to like the mountains and like living amongst like the elements a little more, I guess was my take from it, less about like, oh, you need to like read up on like your local indigenous tribes, like I don't know.
my
Yeah.
form of ceremony is now like ceremonial magic. So that's a new thing. Like I wouldn't have that's not a tradition that I've ever learned before, you know. Nobody in my I mean maybe on fam ancestors that have died did like witchcraft, and probably my like black ancestors in Baltimore did, just to survive type of deal. But I mean that's what like yeah, I've had readings on that a little bit, but I don't want to dive into a lot of that stuff, but you know what I mean? Like that's not a tradition that like nobody taught me how to do magic. So like if we were just embracing the way of tradition, none of us would be here, you know?
Yeah.
No,
So
but I think
Yeah, I
that
mean
but
that's
we
the
are though, because we're relying on the tradition of magic and like something in our souls resonate with that. So I don't think it's about like this literal like my genetics don't connect me to this thing. It's more like something within me, within my soul, within like the timing of my life connects me with this thing. And it wouldn't be if it wasn't supposed to be. Like, I
I
don't
think
know.
for
I feel
these
like
people,
we're returning back to like some sort of tradition that we're trying to rediscover, but in a modern way.
what's the tribe called, Cody?
Huichol.
Huichol. For the Huichol
Hey,
tribe, I think it is genetic. But yeah, continue.
well, I was gonna say I have something. I have a I'll do a little show and tell because I have a Huichol artifact
Ooh.
actually here.
What?
But
Cody even holding out
yeah,
on us.
well, yeah. My dad's really into Huichol stuff, Huichol art, so like he has a collection. Um, but like yeah, I mean that's the challenge of the modern American is we're so alienated from like our, any kind of roots culture that is connected to the land, to spirits, that like we have to find something that we resonate with and like find the depth of it without having like being inundated in the stories and the landscape from childhood, and having our grandparents telling us stories about the landscape, and the having our grandparents telling us the stories of the ancestors who who traveled to find the peyote and sacrifice the deer and whatnot. But
True.
it's all that's so it's like it's tough.
Yeah, true. I mean, I guess the Western magic is of Christian origins.
This is
Beautiful.
a traditional Huichol
Here,
yarn
wait, shine
peyote.
the light on, or like move your camera so that the light can be on the, no, like shine it on the
Yeah.
painting, probably. Yeah,
That's a little.
Yeah. Oh wow.
ooh, the
The
eyes.
color. Oh my God, that's amazing. I love it. The way it's looking down too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Oh
like
my
in
God. With the
flight, but
sun coming
also,
down, you got the light above. Oh my God, this is so gorgeous, Cody. Thank you
So
for
it,
sharing.
and I was actually kind of psyched to read this chapter just because it actually elucidates this yarn. It's yarn. So it's like all
oh,
this is done in like it's like
woven.
string pressed into beeswax on a board.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. So like I like that it elucidates because this is a deer, right? Deer. And
oh,
these like patterns, that's peyote buttons. This is all
oh,
peyote. All
Oh,
peyote. So the deer is peyote. I was like, oh yeah, sweet.
oh,
That's
those
that.
are deer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, trippy. God, that's like exactly the chapter
Yeah.
yeah.
in a painting.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
so
that part of the
cool.
world is really beautiful too. Like I really wanted to go to a shaman down by where I was, but when I went down there, I was near like a lot of the resorts, and the kind of shamans I was going to run into weren't going to be good. Um, but I really want to go back there and do that kind of. I don't know if I want to like do any peyote, but I'd like to like sit in on a ceremony, maybe just kind of like do the shaman guided thing and or something. I don't know. I have like a really weird connection to shamanism that I can't explain, and I know I have family that is traceable indigenous, but I don't know. I've always had this thing about the fancy dancing and like all that kind of stuff. I've always loved like the percussions and the flutes and the lore and the connection to land and everything. So when I found her like as an author, I was like, oh my God, there's a way to like combine like the scholastic knowledge with this way of learning that's completely ambiguous and completely experience oriented. And I don't know, she does a good way of like grounding that for me. I don't know. Like Cody says, she leaves it open-ended enough for you to have your own answers.
And she's creating something of her own, I think. But she is like she's kind of old school. Like this book was written 30 years ago, and so she is a little bit old school, like bordering on cultural appropriation kind of stuff. Um, like relying on like I think she is romanticizing the Weechol a little bit, and I think like the story is beautiful. Like don't get me wrong, I think it's great that she's telling this story, that she's making this. but like it's almost like relying too much on that. Like I don't know. I want, and maybe later in the book, I want her to like guide us into how we actually like embrace a tradition that's our own. Like she's telling us this about this other tradition that's not ours,
Yeah.
that's not mine.
Hmm.
You know, that I like. I
There's no
don't
way to
have any
integrate it.
relation to the Huichol land. Like I don't have any relation to deer in that way. I've never taken peyote. You know, never done a pilgrimage even. You know, really. Like, so it's kind of like, it's cool to read about, but it's like, I don't know, it's kind of classic, a little bit of classic like Western colonialism
I agree.
going on.
To some extent, I agree. I think she
Yeah.
has 20 years on top of when her experience was, or what if it was in the mid 70s versus now. Hopefully she was able to kind of draw conclusions from that, and that's what the rest of the book kind of is going to be about. Um, but yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's a very like 90s way of describing it for sure, and like very anthropological kind of perspective on it, which was colonialization back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, it's nothing like 40 years earlier or earlier than that, where they're
Yeah.
like using anthropology to like diminish the power of these
Human
cultures.
testing, and
Like,
yeah, like our brains are smarter than yours.
yeah,
Type of
but they
shit.
were romanticizing too. So like it's just a fine line. It's a tricky one, and but it's like, but it's also like, and she is making a valiant effort to like get us to think about how we can engage with tradition in a way, and like tradition and landscape. And um I think Tyson Young Caporta does a better job
Yes.
at getting into that, and Gordon White in Animistic is heavy on that, and
Mhm.
he's good at that. So I think like later authors are doing what she's trying to do a little bit better than she
More
does,
gracefully, yeah.
because we just have that much more time with this
Like
information.
this
Like,
feels like a ground setting kind of book. Like I think this is important if you were like I mean, as somebody who is more ecological in my magical practice, or, would ascribe to more animism as of lately, and embracing the ideas of, you know, entities as being otherness in an ecological way. I think this is a good book for foundation. This would be like a 101 course book, because I think it's set the foundation for a lot of what are the more advanced practitioners are doing now in magic.
yeah. And this is why I like really enjoy Frater Rocker's work, because he's actually drawing on like some really deep roots of Western, of the culture that we really do are, like of capitalist materialist culture, like people like Paracelsus, who like defined medicine basically, but like getting to the spiritual aspects of it, and like what are the spiritual roots of our culture, and like revisiting that, and the spiritual roots of like, and like the what's like the heart of Christian mysticism, in Holy Heretics. That's what he's
Mm.
getting to, and that's, I think that's really really powerful for me, and that's like what I'm like enjoying engaging in traditionally. But then I read this, and it's like, yeah, like, okay, like that, this is a good like confirmation that I'm doing the right
Yeah.
thing, and she's coming to a lot of same places as Frater Rocker, but with from a different place. So I
Good.
think that's,
That's exciting.
yeah.
And I noticed that as well. Like the narrative feels very familiar in a good way, in like a affirming kind of way. Like I feel like she would be like more like if she were like 20 years later, she'd be more on the magic path, or something. I don't know. It's like it's so close to what we're doing, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I feel like I found this book like years ago when I was like trying to bridge that like spiritual gap where I was like, okay, like meditation and Eastern stuff has like its own thing, but I felt like I don't know, there was something else that I was looking for, and I think magic was it, but it was like a cool way to like segue into it pretty easily. It was like pretty seamless, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Which I appreciate the setup for. I was like,
I like,
"Yay, I'm ready.
hey,
I'm ready."
I like us reading books like this for our circle. You know, Ingenium and this are very similar in like the philosophy of magic kind of thing. And like developing methods, like, yeah, this is a method, and she's describing the same methods that we've been told in other books in, similar ways. I mean, similar but different ways, but it's more around the ideas around it, and it's inspiring some really good visualization, conceptions of how we appreciate darkness and void and other and returning and whatnot. So I'm excited to continue reading. It's the moral of the story.
Yeah.
Oh, not just to like, and actually just to give it a little bit more praise and to like, she is, and I liked the way she's engaging with, because she is engaging with the natural history of the landscape, the desert, in the first chapter, the desert landscape where they're doing the fasting and retreat, like how it used to be like this lush place, and but LA drained it of, and that like world wound that she opens the chapter with is pretty cool, and like engaging that as part of like, that's part of our heritage that we have to deal with, in this culture, is like these horrible like wounds.
Fresh
And I
land.
guess that relates to
Yeah,
that
fresh wounds
dream that
too.
she has of like her eye and like a gash down to her heart or something. That's pretty awesome too. Like, yeah, these wounds that we have to like learn from and engage, and then yeah.
And feel and embody to some extent. I mean, as a shaman path and what she's doing, like she is embodying the wound of the world, which and then learning how to heal it, in that way. I mean, I think that's, we all have our tropes, we all have our societal expectations of us, and we all are forced to wear wounds just by being born. I mean, that's Buddhist suffering, but learning how to like wear them but understand them, learn from them, and heal from them. It's just very inspiring to view it that way. So whoever relates to you with that same wound can learn from how you healed from it.
Yeah. Or how you like, not necessarily even healed from it, but like
Experienced
maintained
it.
composure with it or something, like
Yeah,
Mhm.
how it's
that's,
like
yeah.
broadened your sense of self and your ultimate sense of identity and reality.
That's something, thank you for saying that, because that is something I've been noticing myself, like heal, that's never like an end point. It's not like, oh, I'm healed, like, that's it, like till next time, folks. It's like, no, like it's a journey, it's a part of uncovering and adapting and molding and shaping. Like,
Sure.
hope it
I
doesn't
love this conversation so much.
That's been a huge thing for me lately, is like that, like I've gotten so upset with like the culture of healing, like everybody's trying to heal something, and I'm like, it's not that. Like, we're not like, oh, we got to heal the deep wounds so that we can, no, like it's not healing at all.
Mm.
It's like, yeah,
It,
it's something else.
Alchemizing, I
It's
guess, but
engaging.
expanding, that even sounds like hierarchical, like, I don't know, just
she
adjusting the
says, oh, sorry. She says the journey doesn't end, nor do the questions.
Yeah.
truth.
And
Yeah, it's
I
not
love that.
like getting to some ideal pure state or something, that like so much new age spirituality has that shit.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think that was our major critique of, meditations on the tarot, where it was the idea of going back to the garden, right? And the garden being this, utopic state. And it's like, that was our main critique of that whole book, whatever 1,000 pages of it was like, all right, it's like we don't, it's not this like magical utopia space where we need to return to, climb to heaven and get to utopia. Like, it doesn't work like that. like we adjust to what, Earth is supposed to be gritty and real and 3D and, visceral and hard, and you're born and crying, you leave crying, kind of thing. But that's part of it, is so that we can like collectively like, yeah, do bigger things. I think I don't like get bigger. I don't even know, it's not like better, but like just like expand. I don't know.
Yeah. My partner's been in this Buddhist psychology course that's really cool, but a lot of what they are training is like intensity capacity. I like that
Ooh, I like that
idea.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's been also like what I've felt with training martial arts. It's like intensity capacity, being able to handle violence, being able to like, oh, I'm okay with a certain amount of violence towards me, like where I can hold out without having to even engage violently back,
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, how was your societal intensity whatever training?
Yeah.
How much can society smack you on the face before you
Yeah.
had enough? Anyway, should we do final quotes? Any final thoughts? I said all the ones I wanted to, which was just the wins and then the fear.
I definitely had another quote. I'll do this
I have
one.
a little quote. It's on 31. The shamans represented the mind of the visionary realm, a mind of no boundaries, a big mind of silence.
Yeah. And then mine was on 27. Silence and solitude are the very basis for our engagement with the world. They are expressed in the experiences of inquiry and listening, nonviolence and non-duality, patience and concentration, connectedness and intimacy, authenticity and stillness, understanding and compassion, and seeing beyond language and intuition.
Yeah. A silent observer. I love it. Okay. Let's see. So like, are we good with 50 pages? Did this feel pretty good? Felt good to me. And then that leads us, so
Yeah.
4 and 5 would be 50 pages if we want to read up to chapter 6. So just
Yeah.
2 chapters this next time. 50 pages sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
this chapter is easier this book is easier than the books we've been reading. So I do appreciate that we are still going back to like a little bit like more smooth of a book
yeah, no more meditations on
intellectually.
the tarot.
Yeah.
Like, it was an important read and I'm glad we did it, but I mean, we did drop a lot of members because of it though also. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it did take some of us out.
I still love that book. Yeah.
Me too.
I
I
still
love
think
reading
about
that book
certain
the way we
chapters
read
that
it.
are like
Yeah. I
Well,
incredible.
love the
we
way we read it
Incredible.
too.
we reference it almost, every
Yeah.
meeting. So, I mean, it's an important understanding of Christian, Hermeticism. Like it is that. So it's just really good to know and to integrate some of those concepts.
Yeah.
The cross. Like now, the Kabbalist the cross makes so much more sense.
Yeah. And a lot of the tarot cards and like how the tarot cards relate to a lot of different experiences, like in different aspects of these books too.
Mhm. Agreed. Okay, stopping the recording.